They say you should learn something new every day. Like how you should only drink Jägermeister at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, ice cold. Like those frozen cavemen they find, which makes you wonder, what would a caveman think of Jägermeister? Well, if you served it warm, he'd probably throw it in your face, say, "Unga boonga," and storm off. And nobody wants that. So drink it cold or not at all. Jägermeister. Damn, that's cold. Drink responsibly. Jägermeister liqueur, 35% alcohol by volume, imported by Mast Jägermeister, U.S., White Plains, New York.
But you know who the toughest players I've been around are? Are the ones who can solve problems across the widest variety of situations and conditions. And they know that no matter what happens with pressure, what happens with challenge, what happens with anxiety or fatigue, they still have the ability to solve problems because they've been there again and again and again.
On today's episode of the Coach and Coordinator podcast presented by Modern Football, we're joined by Shawn Myszka. If you've followed the evolution of skill acquisition and movement training in football, Shawn has been at the center of it. From his movement Miyagi work on X to consulting with NFL players, he's helped reshape how coaches think about practice, development, and what skill actually is. He's also the author of Enhancing Skills in American Football, a book that challenges a lot of what we've traditionally believed about drills, repetition, and player development. This conversation is about seeing the game differently. We get into ecological dynamics, constraints, affordances, and most importantly, how to build practice environments that actually transfer to Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. If you're looking for a new lens on how players learn and how you design practice, this one will stretch your thinking in a good way. And before we get into it, this episode is presented by our partner, Modern Football. If you're serious about making better in-game decisions, Modern Football gives you real-time data on tendencies, efficiencies, and outcomes so you can adjust before it's too late. It's not post-game analysis or answers after the game. It's insight while the game is still being played. Check the description or go to modernfootball.com to book a demo. Now here's our conversation with Shawn Myszka.
Start your day with Quaker Protein Instant Oatmeal. The instant oatmeal ready to help you tackle whatever your day brings, like wrangling your toddler into their car seat. That was fun. Coaching your 6th graders soccer team. Go girls! And carrying all the groceries in one trip. Whew. Try Quaker Protein Instant Oatmeal, Granola, and Bars. Great taste and a good source of protein. Quaker, bring out the good.
On today's episode of the Coach and Coordinator podcast presented by Modern Football, we're talking with Shawn Myszka. He's on X as the Movement Miyagi. He's been on the podcast before. I think it was year 1 or 2. During the season, we did this really cool series on our Mover of the Week. And it was this combination of Shawn, being a movement coach, being a performance coach, saying these are the best moves that I saw in this particular, it was NFL games. And then approaching it from the coach standpoint, like how do we create those situations in practice? And so, Shawn, it's great to have you back. This is a long time coming. I'm really excited about your book, Enhancing Skills in American Football, and we'll give coaches information on how to get that. But again, welcome back to the podcast.
Keith, my friend, and the last time we did this, both of us were a little bit shorter in the tooth, a little less gray in our beards. I had a little bit more hair on my head. So things have evolved, things have changed, but I appreciate you having me and obviously locking arms in this way and featuring some of these ideas and thoughts for coaches to start chewing on and hopefully start absorbing so they can change the way that their practice environments might be able to channel transfer for game day.
Yes, and you and I had talked about some of these subjects before, but you certainly have spent your time here over the last 5-6 years or whenever we did this last in really formalizing it and putting it into, like I said, the book here, and you have some events that you hold as well. But it took me, getting to this. You and I had talked about these things, like I said, but it was, a couple of years ago, and a lacrosse coach turned me on to a basketball book called Transformational Basketball?
Transforming Basketball. Yeah, Alex Sarama, who now Cleveland Cavaliers, obviously in these last couple of years, right down the road from you. And now he just got hired as the head coach at the Portland Fire, adopting a fully ecological approach. So Even though that's the WNBA, there will be a really good case study there that I think that we'll be able to see program.
Yeah, and definitely. And so the funny story is that, so I start reading this book and I'm listening to, his podcast as well. And Shawn Myszka keeps coming up. I'm like, damn, I got to get a hold of him. And I text you, I'm like, oh, man, I am into this stuff. And you're quoted on it in your paper. And I sent it. And then I scrolled up a little bit. It had been some time I talked. I scrolled up. I'm like, and damn, you shared this with me 2 years ago. And, the realization was, and I think a lot of this, I think coaches will come to it this way, is it took me stepping away from the information. You had a really good scholarly paper written and seeing it in the lens of basketball in a different sport and saying, geez, that's right. I see how this applies to me, to be able to get to it from football. Since then, you have written the book. And as I told you before, this book reminds me of, in the movie Men in Black, when Will Smith's going around that course, and they're supposed to shoot at the bad guy and he blows off the head of this little cardboard girl who's got books. And, he's like, why'd you do it? So he's like, she was about to start some shit. Like, this book could have been in that stack of books. And I mean, hey, this stretches our thinking and this stretches how we need to look at how do we develop our players moving forward.
Yeah, and I appreciate those words. I appreciate that thought. When you first started giving me the movie analogy, I actually thought you might have gone to the Matrix there because it's sort of red pill, blue pill, right? There's a quote by Wayne Dyer where he says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So you will still be looking at the interactions that take place on a football field, on a gridiron, on a Friday night, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, wherever it might be that you obviously exist, whatever time scale of football and learning. You're going to see the same thing, but you're going to see the things differently. That is my hope. That is my objective with the book, obviously. And then allow coaches themselves who are willing to be open and empty cupped. They're coming to the table saying that I might have been wrong here. I might have been on the right path there, but I should have done a little bit more of that. Maybe I got to absorb a whole heck of a lot more from over in this area. And it might be these respective concepts that sometimes scare us. And Keith, as you well know, in American football and in cross coaching, we all have the best of intentions. We're all trying to do right by the development of the players that are under our watch that we're locking arms with. And it's not so much about challenging those intentions. It's more so in challenging how we brought it to life and to continue to adapt, to continue to reinvent what it is that we're doing, but also to ask why it is that we've been doing certain things for such a long period of time. Because now when we let theory and art come together and intersect with one another, there's a lot of modern contemporary ideas in skill acquisition science that if I go to any American football practice, high school, college, professional, anything in between and anything below or anything after, what you find is that there's a lot that's in violation of what we have found from skill acquisition theory and research. And that's what we're really bringing into question and we wanted to introduce into the American football world. So obviously it's the first book that really did that. And I'm obviously very proud to say that we're doing that. There's still a lot further to go. There's a lot deeper that we could have or should have gone within the book. But we will get there. It was meant to be an introduction to red pill, blue pill, whatever one you want to look at there. Hopefully too many people aren't shooting book in the Men in Black style as well.
Well, for me, you definitely should get this book as a coach. I knew some of the things in looking at the table of contents that dragged me off of reading it straight through. And I read this and I read that. There's so much here. I think the things that come up again and again, the words, the key definitions we need to start this conversation, and we may have to pick this up in another episode, but there's 3 of them that continually come up, and it's ecological dynamics, it's affordances, and it's the constraints-led approach. Those are 3 things I think if you read this book, you're getting into it, having some baseline knowledge of what are these things would be helpful. So I would like to start there and go over those 3 terms.
Yeah, really good question, Keith. And I would agree with you. And I would probably add another one in there in regards to this theme that hopefully should be threaded throughout with this idea around movement behavior being a problem-solving activity, because that allows us to reconceptualize what skill really is, what skill means, what it means to bring it to life, and how we might acquire and or adapt it. So I would probably add that 4th one into those 3. The first one being ecological dynamics, because some of these terms and ideas that underpin ecological dynamics. They are concepts, pedagogical principles, maybe scientific or theoretical constructs that form ecological dynamics. Ecological dynamics is essentially a way to be able to have our scope and scale of analysis, our vantage point, always on the player-environment relationship, the mutual reciprocal nature between a player and their greater environment that exists around them. And you obviously mentioned the constraints-led approach, but when we think about quantifying the environment and we think about across situations and across conditions, we can begin to look at the confluence of certain constraints, the task, the organism, and the environment coming together, this confluence of constraints that creates this contextual backdrop. And I'm saying that to sort of paint the picture that it's that context that shapes the content that will be the skill. So the context of the situation, task, organism, environment, all coming together, create this backdrop for the content that is the movement solution. Now, what we find in American football is no matter what we think, if we zoom out far enough or zoom in far enough, no two movement problems in American football are ever truly the same. The constraints at a certain level are not going to be the same, and a small change to certain constraints could lead to a big change in the content of the movement solution. And I think that's one of the things that coaches themselves need to recognize. I don't think anyone would dispute with me that at a certain level, movement problems are different. But if they are different, then why are we practicing in a way where we're trying to make it the same over and over and over again? We're trying to repeat by rote, to repeat it to perfection so it can emerge automatically. That flies in the face of when we take a player-environment relationship and we look at the mutual reciprocal nature of it. Those are going to have changing states of organization at all times. Just by changing the other party on the other side of the ball from us changes things dramatically, and every football coach knows that intuitively. But then we practice in a way where we think perfect practice makes perfect. And if you haven't practiced it enough, you're not going to have perfect execution. Well, it's not about perfect execution in an ecological dynamics rationale. Skill to us is about an adaptive, functional relationship with what's unfolding and what's emerging. So it comes down to problem solving. It comes down to the athletes themselves having the ability to perceive, decide, act in accordance to what is there, as opposed to in accordance to some sort of if-then that type of rules. It's about allowing these problems to be presented to the player in practice so they can solve it in a really emergent way. So sorry, I got a little deep in the weeds there when you just asked me what ecological dynamics is, but I feel like it was able to pull on some threads that are going to be very important and imperative, not only for us in this conversation, but for someone to change the way they look at what is emerging on a football field. So then they start to chase skill in a very different way from my perspective.
Yeah, I heard it. And I don't recall if this was Alex or this was you, but the analogy that kind of cemented like, okay, I need to look at how I was doing things before is the idea of like that you could train every decision, like you said, these if-then things, and that the brain will dial it up. Like, and the analogy was going back to movies was the Terminator, right? Like you see the Terminator scrolling through the decisions like, okay, this is what I need to do. That the brain just doesn't work like that. As humans, we just don't work that way. Now, in football, yes, there will be the things that appear again and again and again, and the decisions we need the player to make. And I always talk to players now like, look, the line only is like the introduction to the story, the line that's drawn on this diagram, and it does end at one point, and I didn't give you the rest of the story here. You're going to have to fill in that part. But even on that line, I always tell my guys, I don't want you running around out here like robots. Like there are decisions you need to make, and I'm going to do the best to construct our practices, our drills around this so that you can experience those so that they won't happen for the first time. But ultimately, there's going to be a first time it happens for you on the field. And, you know, you will, within your skill, within your body type, within your abilities, learn some movements there that might be different from the other guy. So it's like the big thing was like the Terminator, and don't be running around here like a robot.
Yeah, like what you're really describing is like the brain being able to go through its decision-making tree or some sort of decision-making process, working through this Rolodex of not only decisions, but also what types of movement strategies they might be able to employ that are connected to those decisions. And for us, it isn't first we perceive and then we decide and then we act in sort of this linear, segmented way, like an isolated way, which is oftentimes the way that most American football coaches are training it. And it's the reason why we think we can do things that walk through speed and they will automatically transfer or translate to game speed. We know that oftentimes there's a huge disconnect there because we're disconnecting the solver from the problem. So as a coach, what we're really trying to do is be a problem setter and then a solution facilitator. So the solution facilitation really comes down to the player themselves always perceiving, always cognizing, and always acting, meaning they're doing all at once together and they become inseparable from one another. Like my friend Rob Gray would say, and Rob is obviously the third author on the book, a skill acquisition legend, Perception Action podcast, and he gets really deep in some of these things. Obviously, he's been a scientist at Arizona State and currently works for the Chicago Cubs as a skill acquisition specialist. Like, we talk a little bit about keeping them coupled. And when I say a little bit about, we talk a lot about keeping them coupled. Not only the player and environment, but the problem and the solver, and then the perception, cognition, and action process. Keeping it all coupled. So the relationship, the mutual reciprocal nature of the relationship always remains intact. And that's where the idea of affordances come into play. And then, of course, when we're talking about learning and practice design, or particularly problem setting, we're able to then begin to manipulate constraints that create these slices or snippets of the game that allow the players to be presented with these problems to solve. And now they get to chase authenticity, they get to chase sensitivity, they get to chase adaptability. And that's really what we have found when we look and investigate the most skillful movers in the sport. You can look at Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. They all move very, very different, even if they're solving similar problems.
Yeah, the problem-solving part was something I realized. I got an answer to a question I asked. This is back 2004. We're learning, we're putting in the zone offense for the first time. We're running wide zones, our main thing. Learned it from a really good coach in the area who was coaching high school, but had been a coordinator at the Big Ten level. And his program was different. He had some dudes. I asked him, okay, we didn't talk about coaching the running back. Like, what do you do? If your guy's not seeing it, how do you train him up to see this? How do you, train him up with all these different things that might happen on his path? He's like, well, if this guy doesn't do it, I just put the next one in. Well, okay, I have this really good guy, and then after him, it's a big drop-off. I mean, I'm going to have to train those guys, so this won't work. And it sent us down a study of what does happen on this play, what are the different things, and isolating those. And really, we boiled it down to three main things, but this particular running back that we had, Alex, he certainly was going to handle it different than the next guy behind him. It was a guy who would play fullback. He'd move back there. I mean, and he ran differently than that. And so we stumbled into it. That became our drills, right? There weren't bags out there. It was like, here's how we're going to simulate it with people out here. Here's the reactions we're starting to train. But, not realizing at the time, like this specificity towards Alex is not going to do it the same as Ryan because they're different body types. One was 6 foot 220. The others was 6'1", 6 foot 190, and like could blaze. The other guy was a bruiser. So different styles, but they both got really good at it, understood those basics, but then also understood like what they were able to do. That it was more the live training rather than here's this dummy and I'm going to tilt it one way or the other and you're going to go this way. Like really, we had no equipment for those drills, and so that was the first part of this is knowing what you're saying is that there are the affordances, and those are specific to the player. And going back to the basketball example, it was you guys, I think it was you and Alex on the one, just talking about the differences between the body types that, a Steph Curry is going to do it a lot different than, a big guy in the paint. And when he's going up against him, it's going to be different than when he's facing a guard, right? So it's like, wow, yeah, I was pretty linear in the approach where, like I said, we kind of stumbled into it, but it wasn't by design. now when you start to have this knowledge, I think you can design better.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with something, and something I want to trace back to that you said there, my friend, about 90 seconds or so ago, where you said the players themselves, when they were put in these activities, and that's one of the things that I continue to harp on, obviously, throughout the book. We don't call the activities that we do in practice drills, because a drill would insinuate a more materialistic way of saying, like, this is a way you need to do it. Everyone's going to do it in this way, and it's going to happen in this almost rehearsed type of fashion, right? Everything that we do in our practice, training, and learning environment is really an activity, and it's an activity that presents a problem for the player to solve. And something you said, Keith, there was that when the players started to solve these problems, they started to understand what they could do in that situation. Not what one versus the other. And then that coach says, hey, look at how this player behaves. And now you need to behave like him because he's the stud in front of you, without recognizing and realizing the elephant in the room that one of these is not like the other. Right. And I obviously have said this example before about really high level movers. You know, I've used the comparison with Adrian Peterson and Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders was somebody that I believe is the most dexterous, most skillful player to have ever played the game. So when Adrian and I were working together, we're looking at Barry Sanders like, Adrian, what of these things can you do? Without realizing, like, Barry Sanders is 5'8", less than 200 pounds, and Adrian Peterson is 6'1", grabs your hand like an anaconda and is a horse, you know? Like, these are two separate entities, two exceptional, extraordinary backs, but they shouldn't be solving these even similar unfolding problems in the same way. And it's not just that they understand or begin to understand when they're presented with these problems what they can do. They also begin to connect to really what's there. What might change when I change my own behaviors? What other opportunities to act? And I'm using those words very intentionally because that's really what an affordance is. What can I do and what opportunities are there for me to interact in the world based on this changing environment? And that's the way I really like to describe it. And really what then we begin to do in training and practice design is what we refer to in the book as constrain to afford. So we manipulate constraints so certain openings and opportunities may emerge or decay or appear and disappear for the player to be presented with. Like, we're changing where opponents are running from rep to rep to rep. So we're leaning into the idea of repetition without repetition from Nikolai Bernstein, which flies completely in the face of course, the way that most in American football coach, which is rep after rep. We want to repeat it until we cannot get it wrong. Bingo, everyday drill. Even in our everyday drills, those problems are highly alive, constantly unpredictable. Perturb that movement system to see what else that mover can do and how else they have the ability to adapt. So even in everyday drills, and I have said this for years, buddy, like, if every coach changed their EDDs to have aliveness with opponents present, they scrapped the agility ladders, they scrapped the bags, they scrapped the dummies, and they put real live humans who will really move, even if it's not overly intense or very fast. At least the players have a problem that's alive, that is unpredictable, that needs to be solved. And they become sensitive to that information that specifies the opportunities to act, or also known as the affordances. So these openings will close and emerge, and all of a sudden there it is. It'll surprise you. And then you'll begin to, as a mover, so the player themselves begins to have a tremendous amount more agency. They start to understand how many different ways they can move and what those respective movement problems really mean to them. And that, to me, is really like the ownership of the skill.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into the next term, as you are starting to be a coach maybe who understands this and looking to level up your everyday drills to include some of these things, really gets into the constraints-led approach, right? In understanding as a coach, how can I manipulate things to be able to create these situations that they're going to face within a game?
Yeah. And of course, we made sure within the book that we tried to spark thoughts and ideas for the coaches themselves. So when they see what's emerging out in their practice, training, and learning environment, they're able to manipulate constraints accordingly. So we have an entire chapter, a chapter 6, 48 pages, of live activities, everything from EDDs to of low complexity, where it might be 1v1, 1v2, 2v2, and then higher complexity, bigger slices of the game where we would manipulate constraints across those activities. And we meant for it not to be a cookbook of drills. I didn't want it to be a cookbook of drills. I wanted it to be activity design that the coach themselves would learn how to design those problems in their practice. And so we just offer constraint manipulation suggestions essentially, based on what the coach is seeing. So it now requires the coach, if they become a problem setter, attempting to facilitate solutions or the movement problem solving process of the players they work with, to begin to tweak and adjust these small constraints. And I'm talking about everything from having different opponents rep to rep to rep. So really no two reps are the same. Players coming from different places and positions, to just even changing and adjusting intentions of both parties dramatically changes the nature of the activity. So even in an everyday drill, where on one day you might tell that horse of a running back that's in your stable, today I just want you to see how you can explore. What other information can you pick up about the opponents that are moving in the environment on this day for this 10, 12, 15 minutes of our indie period? Just changing his intentions will dramatically change how he's going to interact with that quote unquote drill that we call a learning activity or a problem, right? And then the next day, be like, I think you want to see if you can beat players with speed today. So still, individual period, he's still in these alive activities. He might be in the same activity, but the activity is very different. If one day he's exploring, the next day he's going to try to beat players with speed, and the next day you tell him, today I want you to see if you can deceive other opponents. So now you combine those first 2 days' intentions, and you tell that player in your learning environment, hey, I want you to see how you can deceive your fellow opponents. So now all of a sudden, every single activity, whether it's of low complexity or of higher complexity, that player begins to own different ways of solving those problems. So even just manipulating constraints from an intention standpoint of the organism, of the player, can go a long ways. And now we lean into Bernstein's idea of dexterity, which is the highest expression of skill, the ability to solve any emerging movement problem across situations and across conditions. That's where we can manipulate constraints to change our situations. So all of a sudden, a different amount of bodies in the same space changes the complexity and the disposition of the problem tremendously. Different players in that space, different speeds, different angles, postures, kinematics, how the player is even entering the space, or again, what it is that they're aiming to do, are just some simple ways that we can change the activity so it's never, ever the same river that they're standing in, because we never step in the same river twice. We're not the same man. The river's not the same either. So now we can do it under fatigue, in chaos, with pressure, anxiety, arousal, etc. That's really what we're trying to present. And there's a lot of different paths that we can go down there with that constraints-led approach. But are things that oftentimes as coaches, we're not leveraging or leaning into at all. And I think if we were to just do a little bit of that, all of a sudden, aliveness goes up tremendously. Repetition without repetition is inherent to the activity. They never solve the same problem because the problem is constantly changing and their movement solution is changing in accordance to it. And you know what that feels like? Game day. That's exactly what happens on every single time the ball is snapped.
Yeah. A quick break here for a word from our partner. This episode is brought to you by Modern Football. We've been talking about player development, problem solving, and creating better practice environments. But here's the reality. You also need to know what's actually happening on game day. Modern Football helps you connect those two worlds. You spend all week long building smarter players. Modern Football shows you if it's working. It tracks tendencies, success rates, and situations in real time so you can evaluate performance and make adjustments on the fly. And it's not just for calling plays. It's an evaluation and tool for development. You can see which concepts your players handle well, where they struggle, and how opponents are attacking you with the Modern Football evaluation tools. The feedback loop is what helps you coach better the next week. If you want your players thinking faster and your staff making better decisions, Modern Football gives you the information to back it up. Go to modernfootball.com or click the link in the description. since it's fresh in everybody's mind here because it got viral with, I don't know, last I looked, over 5 million views. But SEMO ran a drill and it was, 3-on-1, and you mentioned manipulating numbers. And so maybe on the surface, this looked like it would be okay. I think there's some inherent problems with this drill in ways that it could be much, much better.
Yeah.
The idea, like just hearing some of the comments made with people coming in defense of like, well, this is a toughness drill. I went through in my mind, like, when do I actually see something like this happen in a game? And it's really where I went first to maybe punt return, like with 3 guys
Maybe
miss their block. But I also don't see like the reckless abandon of those 3 guys. One of them's working to get this guy to stop his feet, and the rest are looking to clean him up. And also that guy isn't given instructions like run as hard as you can through the first person who gets there. And I mean, I slowed it down and watched it, and I mean, it cringed because the first guy gets there and wraps up. The second guy is in the process of turning his body completely into his knees. Thank God feet didn't stick in the ground. And then the third guy ends up in a position where he just puts his head down and he misses, but he would have went either helmet to helmet or hard part of his shoulder pad into the helmet. Fortunately, he missed in this particular play. So let's talk about that. Let's leave that right there and go ahead and break that down from, a movement standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that you mentioned there, Keith, there's actually 2 things that I think we need to continue to think about. And this is what we should do with literally every practice activity we utilize in our practice or environment on a frequent basis or even on an occasional basis. We need to ask ourselves, does this look, feel, act, and unfold like it will on game day? Will there frequently be this 3v1? And maybe we rationalize or reason out that, yes, it will. So it's worth it to do, right? At least it's happening, it's unfolding, and let's just say 3 guys come unblocked. Okay, cool. I can logically say that could be okay. I can see that part. And even when you sent it to me, and obviously it had already been going viral, I think, for 24 hours at that point, and I had numerous football coaches across levels had already sent it to me. And this constant narrative that I bring up is, and I think I said this to you, is, well, it's representative. It can be representative. There could be a 3v1 where multiple missed blocks occurred, and now that returner has to be able to deal and be comfortable in this chaos. But you didn't really see the intentions of any one of those respective players play out in a way that would unfold if that were to happen on game day. If all hell breaks loose like this, it certainly was alive. It certainly had unpredictability. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best place and space for learning or acquiring and adapting skill. And this was something that I talk quite a bit about in the book on several different occasions. And this is something I aim to do in my own learning environment. Now, those of you who aren't aware, typically on a year-by-year basis, I'll have 10 to 12 National Football League players in my learning environment. But we bring in sparring partners from the college level, D1 through D3, to spar our guys. But we have a very cohesive and cooperative environment to not only keep players safe, but to allow the sparring engagements to allow for the best opportunity for both sides of the party. So the defense or the offense, the punt return or the punt cover, in this case, to own what they're doing and to go through their process of solving the problems again and again and again, right? What we saw was basically the equivalent of, in martial arts or combat sports or in boxing, just throwing players into a sparring engagement with the expectation or anticipation that it's a fight. But that's not how they truly spar in the best learning environments in combat sports. Sparring is a cooperative exchange and interaction with certain really established rules of engagement and interaction. We are interacting in a way that still resists our opponent, but to give them an opportunity for a certain look or to learn something about how it is that when this problem is presented to them, they are able to explore and search and find an opportunity to act. And when we're moving at too high of speeds, and this is something I tell every college player that comes into our NFL player list. Not only because I got to keep that NFL player safe, because my career is on the line when that happens. And you get some guys who show up from the college ranks, even, local D1 or, St. Thomas, University of Minnesota, and they come in and they think this is like a scrimmage. This is not a scrimmage. This is a sparring engagement, and it's up to you for both sides of the coin to get what it is that they need from this, to own what it is that you do and how it is that you do it. So all of a sudden, the most tremendous amount of learning that I've seen in my learning environment for both NFL players and those college players when they enter these sparring engagements is operating at 75, 80% speed. Because when you start hitting 95 and 100, you just do what you've always done, and that's hang on for dear life and just resort to whatever movement strategy you have available to you. Most practices aren't for that. Practices are for learning. Practices are for adapting. Practices are for adjusting what it is that you might do in relation to what might happen. And so when players are moving with reckless abandon, all of a sudden, there's not a lot of learning that can occur. All players are just existing in the chaos. They're not really getting more comfortable in it, because you might have even seen there was a former player of the program that came out and shared a clip. And I don't know if you've seen that yet. He came out and shared a clip of him getting injured on a similar activity there at that program. Not saying that can obviously happen, and that's an anomaly. I've had players obviously get hurt. I've seen players in combat arts and sports get hurt moving at 75 to 80%. That's not to say that can't happen at those speeds. But why would we ever want to run the risk when players themselves are a commodity that we don't want to expend? We're there to develop the players. We're there to put them in a place and a space for optimal learning. And I find that it just doesn't happen with that type of reckless chaos. And that's what I saw from it. So we could manipulate constraints more purposely, even just by changing the speeds, my friend. We could change that what is probably happening for intentions for players, all four players involved in that 3v1.
Yeah, so let's take that, and I think we'll wrap up on this today. So there's definitely a part 2 coming, because we have so much more to touch on. But let's take that activity and let's think about, getting them to understand affordances, the constraints-led approach. How do we tweak that to make it better? How do we tweak that to create that situation that's going to happen on game day? And, like you said, like those guys, they all need to learn not just the tough aspect of go get your nose in there, but how this is going to unfold and their role in it, because, all three of them are not going to be able to come in like heat-seeking missiles to this one player, nor is that one player going to act like, just a rocket going forward and not stopping and doing anything.
Yeah, I think the first and foremost, the biggest thing that I would start with, and I have done 2v1, 3v1 type of situations in this type of setting, but I'll often stagger the positions that they start from. So now all three opponents are moving at different speeds, first and foremost, right? So you don't have three guys coming at you and you just elect to go into the fire head first, hair flying in the fire, ears pinned back. You're going to run at them. They're going to run at you. It's going to be a game of chicken, which is essentially what it was, right? So oftentimes that's one way that I'll do it. I'll stagger those guys. And of course, one rep, I might throw in a teammate. So it becomes a 3v2 in one situation. So now one guy is blocked. That automatically slows it down because now you have more moving bodies, maybe even in a similar space. The other thing that I would say is you could potentially change the workspace, and we don't know exactly how they might have done it at that program. Maybe they did do it closer to begin with, but that's probably how I would start it. So players aren't moving at as high of speeds right off the bat, but we're still pretty early. It's the last week in March, I think, when this was recorded, or second last week in March when it was recorded, probably, at least when they put it out. And so they're probably relatively early in spring. I don't know if they would have progressed the activity in this way, right? The other thing that I would say here is the speed of the movement. Just because we're in spring ball, again, changing the intentional speeds of each respective party and player. One of the things that I suggest to every football coach is to create a culture, a practice culture around sparring speeds. What does it mean to spar? And that's something that we start in every one of our training activities when we bring in these college guys to spar with the players that I partner with. I will remind them, I don't know if you've ever been in a combat sport, but when you spar, it's not truly a full fight. It's not a street fight. It's a controlled engagement where we are interacting in relation to one another in a way where it's cooperative. We are still competing, but it is cooperative. I'm giving a guy a look. I'm trying to see things myself differently. And all of a sudden, when you do that, the intensity goes down ever so slightly. And I know that a lot of football coaches are going to cringe when they hear, wait a minute, our program is built on intensity. But that intensity will ultimately get ramped back up when all those players become more functional problem solvers. All of a sudden, the intensity becomes natural because everyone begins to operate at ownership speeds, and their ownership speeds get faster and faster and faster. And that's what naturally happens throughout the course of the calendar year than if you set this up. And I believe the spring is the time to set the precedence on that the practice environment is for learning. And if it's for learning, everybody learns at different rates in space, and we're not just trying to play the game. That's the thing that we often get in an ecological approach. Well, if you're keeping the player-environment relationship intact, that must mean you just played the game. That's not what we're doing. We're creating slices and snippets of the game that present continually emerging movement problems to the players for them to solve in different ways and repeat their process of solving that problem. Not repeat a means of a solution where we're just going to go head on and then the next 3 guys on that side and the next one on this one, go repeat that in the same way because we're trying to get toughness. I'm glad that they came out and basically said what their intention was for it, but you know who the toughest players I've been around are the ones who can solve problems across the widest variety of situations and conditions. And they know that no matter what happens with pressure, what happens with challenge, what happens with anxiety or fatigue, they still have the ability to solve problems because they've been there again and again and again.
Amen to that. Well, we're going to stop it there. And I definitely want to keep going with this. I don't know how many episodes this will be, but I know you're always up for it.
I am. We only scratch the surface, as you well know.
Yeah. Definitely. I do want to make sure to get the book. It's on Amazon. Any other place coaches should go to for that?
No, just go to Amazon. It is right now only carried on Amazon. I think we ultimately will have it at our website at Emergence or with Emergence at Emergent Movement. And the movement is mvmt.com. So emergentmovement.com. But that's the biggest place for coaches to get it. And if they have any thoughts or ideas or questions before they even spend $32 to pick up the book on Amazon, where they can find me is just look through my YouTube. Obviously, I'm still doing the movement plays of the week, and I look at the respective play and then show how manipulation of constraints could potentially unfold to set similar movement problems for the players we work with. So if you begin to become intrigued there, because I don't just I expect everyone to take our word for it right now. You and I, 2 friends, kind of reminiscing around these ideas and thoughts for the last 40 minutes. So don't necessarily just take our word for it. Go look there and hopefully you see something that might intrigue you and then maybe think about picking up the book.
I'll put that link in the description. Also, want to mention it. We'll definitely bring it up again. You have an event coming up, and I think
I do.
This event for anybody who could travel to it, in-person event, definitely would be something worth looking into.
Yeah, the Sport Movement Skill Conference, June 5th ends 2026. Our 9th annual Sport Movement Skill Conference is taking place here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Coach Dan Mulrooney from Brown University, defensive coordinator for Brown University, is going to lock arms there with my friend Tyler Yerby from Emergence, who's also in on the book. I'll be doing a practical session. Tony Holler from Feed the Cats, Tony Valeni from XPE, where he and I are going to be doing a debate around our approaches to game speed. So a lot of things highly relevant to American football coaches at the event, June 5th and 6th, Sport Movement Skill Conference.
Well, Shawn, we'll pick it up from here next time. I love getting back with you and talking. That 40 minutes flew by. I hope our coaches got something out of it. We will dig deeper into it, so stick with us and we'll get into some practical applications across all kinds of different positions. And like I said, this is a book worth picking up and getting into, and it's going to test you, it's going to challenge you, but I think ultimately it will make you better. So thanks for what you're doing, Shawn, and I will remember the next time you send me something in a text to read it.
I appreciate it, my friend, and thanks to you so much for obviously having me and locking arms in such a genuine and sincere and authentic way. I appreciate you.
That was a great conversation today with Shawn Myszka. This is one of those episodes you probably need to go back to and listen to again, because there's a lot in there that challenges how we've done things. If you want a deeper dive, make sure you check out his book, Enhancing Skills in American Football, and his work at Emergent Movement. I'll put the link to both of those in the show notes. And again, this episode is presented by Modern Football. If you're looking for an edge on game day, this is how you get it. Real-time tendencies and real-time insights, so you're not guessing at halftime. We'll be back with more conversations that help you coach smarter and develop better players. Follow all we're doing on the Coach and Coordinator Network at coachandcoordinator.com and follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.